Jason Greenblatt, bonjour à vous et merci d'avoir accepté notre invitation. Vous êtes le président, directeur général, le CEO de l'ADL, l'Anti-Defamation League, l'une des plus grandes organisations internationales de lutte contre l'antisémitisme. Vous menez actuellement une visite en France, notamment auprès de responsables politiques et communautaires. Jason Greenblatt, est-ce que vous êtes particulièrement inquiet de l'augmentation des chiffres de l'antisémitisme en France, tout particulièrement et plus largement en Europe, en particulier depuis les massacres du 7 octobre 2023 en Israël?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. I should say right up front that my name is Jonathan, not Jason. But look, the ADL is the oldest anti-hate organization in America. We've been focused on fighting anti-Semitism, racism, and extremism for over 100 years. And we've been concerned about anti-Semitism in Europe for a very long time. I would say that since October the 7th, everything has exploded. And we work very closely with the CRIF, as well as with other Jewish communal organizations. And we've been incredibly alarmed about the surge of anti-Jewish hate here in France, really all across Europe and around the world.
Jonathan Greenblatt, quelles sont les similarités entre les formes d'expression que prennent l'antisémitisme en France et aux États-Unis?
It's a really excellent question. There are real parallels between the way that anti-Semitism manifests in the United States and in France, and really in many liberal democracies. So first of all, let's talk about what's driving it. You see political polarization, you see emboldened extremists, you see sort of demographic changes, and you also see social media. All of these forces have sort of fueled the normalization of anti-Semitism, and they fueled the manifestations of hate in ways we haven't seen before. So what does it look like here in France in comparison to America? Number one, there are tropes and myths about Jewish people that persist and cross cultures and continents. So for example, myths about dual loyalty, myths about Jews controlling the media, myths about Jews not being legitimate, delegitimization. You see these things in America and here in France. So sometimes today, in today's political parlance, the anti-Semitism, it manifests as anti-Zionism. And people say, well, we don't hate Jews. We just hate Israel. We don't hate the Jewish religion. We just hate the Jewish state. But then you see the same myths that were once applied to Jews applied to Israel. And just because people are cloaking their anti-Semitism in political language doesn't change the fact that what underlies it, what animates it, is a kind of vicious toxicity toward Jewish people.
Alors, à l'échelle globale, l'ADL a mis au point un indicateur très précis, très fiable, le ADL Global 100. Qu'est-ce qu'il montre sur l'état de l'antisémitisme dans le monde en 2025, presque 20 mois maintenant après les massacres du 7 octobre?
ADL, one of the core things that we do, I mean, we have three main lines of activity. We protect, we advocate, and we educate. In terms of protect, we start by tracking and responding to anti-Semitism, domestically in the US, where we were founded, and globally. So in order to do that, we assess attitudes and we measure incidents. So first, attitudes. So we run surveys every 2 to 3 years, like a sentiment analysis, to try to gauge how the majority population feels about Jewish people. So in this case, we do a domestic survey in the United States. And what I can tell you briefly is that we've been doing these surveys, I should say, since the 1960s. So we have a lot of information, a lot of longitudinal data. We're a very data-driven, evidence-based organization. And basically, in the last 5 years, intense, elevated anti-Semitic attitudes have more than doubled their share of the population. In 2019, it was 11% of the US population had intense anti-Semitic attitudes. Today, in the last 5 years, it's gone from 11 to 24%. Now, globally, the numbers are even more stark. So when we did our first global survey of 100 plus countries in 2014, And we work with the market research firm Ipsos, based here in Paris, to do these surveys. In 2014, we found that 26% of adults worldwide had entrenched or extreme anti-Semitic attitudes. 26%. That's more than 1 billion people. We thought that was a lot. When we ran the survey last year, in 2024, that percentage went from 26% to 46%. 2.2 billion adults and change. And that's based on almost 60,000 interviews in many different languages all over the planet. So to see that the percentage of adults worldwide who with intense anti-Semitism has more than or nearly doubled in the last decade is shocking. The good news, if you will, here in France, the numbers are much lower. Only 13% of the population has elevated anti-Semitic attitudes. That's a lower number than we saw even in the United States. So that's very encouraging. But at ADL, we don't just track the attitudes. We also track the incidents. So in the United States, we have a direct line to communities. And people call or email or text or fill out a form when they experience anti-Semitism. And so we've been systematically tracking incidents since the 1970s. And to make a long story short, in America, over the last decade, anti-Semitic incidents, acts of harassment, vandalism, and violence, targeting Jewish people or Jewish institutions because they are Jewish, that number has exploded 10x. So whereas in 2015 we had roughly 940 incidents that we could prove, that we could validate, last year nearly 9,400. So it's a massive increase. Now everything worsened since October the 7th. So in the United States, year over year, we saw after October 7th, nearly 140% increase in anti-Jewish acts over the prior year. 2023 was the all-time high. And then in 2024, it went up another 5%, breaking a new record. These numbers are very similar on a per capita basis to what we see here in France, where the number of anti-Semitic incidents, according to the CRIF or SPCJ, they will tell you that the number's up something like 400% year over year. So the reality is that whereas we as Jewish people live with a lot of privileges, we live with full rights, we live with tremendous comfort in liberal democracies like France and America, the kind of status that our grandparents would never believe. And at the same time, we live in a very precarious position right now, a position that unfortunately seems to be more fragile, not less.
Vous évoquiez tout à l'heure, Jonathan Greenblatt, les évolutions de l'antisémitisme ces dernières années, la diabolisation d'Israël, l'accusation faite aux Juifs de diaspora d'être des sionistes favorables, je cite toujours, au génocide des Palestiniens. Tout ça tient une place de plus en plus importante dans les discours de haine anti-juive, notamment dans les universités.
So we certainly believe at the ADL that there is room to criticize the state of Israel for certain policies or certain programs. You can criticize its leaders, like you can criticize policies of the Republic of France or the United States of America. And yet, what we see directed at Israel far exceeds the standard or ordinary criticism of a country. Indeed, demonizing Israel is a tried and true tactic of the anti-Semites. We see that in the United States, we see that in France, we see that in particular at the universities, and I'll explain why that's so troubling. But just to be clear, again, we believe it's fine to criticize policies of any government around the world, but there's a certain approach when we see it used toward Israel that we can apply to understand when it's not just criticism, it's something different. We developed this approach, well, we don't get the credit for it. Natan Sharansky developed this approach, the famous prisoner of conscience. He calls it the 3D test. Have you familiar with this?
Yes.
Right. So number one, do you demonize the state in all the people of the state, rather than just the individuals responsible for something you don't like? Number two, do you delegitimize the state rather than recognizing its valid right to exist like any other? And then number three, do you apply double standards versus how you approach other countries? So when we use this test, we see that so often the criticism of Israel is not intended to, typically criticism, the intent is to improve the country. The intent is to demonstrate what we think should be done in order to make it better. But for so many of the anti-Semites, they're not interested in improving Israel. They're interested in eliminating Israel. So it manifests in different ways. Number one, kind of ideological opposition to Israel as an entity and the effort to try to discredit Zionism as a general philosophy. Now look, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. If the only country in the world that you don't think has the right to exist is Israel, that's a problem. And look, there's nothing comparable to anti-Zionism in the world. There is no other country. Take, for example, now, by the way, Israel is a liberal democracy that I am a ferocious, unapologetic Zionist. Let me be clear. But you cannot find another country on earth with a whole school of thought devoted, dedicated, relentlessly to determining its illegitimacy and its right to, be destroyed. There's no sort of anti-Russian school of thought, right? There is no anti-Venezuelan school of thought. There is no anti-anything other than anti-Zionism. And anti-Zionism is so insidious because I will tell you, Zionism did not start, in 1967. Zionism didn't start, with the Six-Day War and the quote-unquote occupation of Judea and Samaria. Zionism didn't start in 1948 with the founding of Israel. Zionism didn't start in 1897 with the first Zionist Congress and Theodore Herzl. Zionism started 3,000 years ago with Moshe Rabbeinu. Zionism is the reason why every synagogue here in France, like every synagogue in America, like every synagogue on earth, why the bima is pointed toward Yerushalayim is because of the inherent connection that the Jewish people have to Eretz Yisrael. So you cannot disentangle Zionism from Judaism. It's like saying I can live without my heart, without my lungs, without my brain. So it is fundamental and essential to who we are and to our identity. And I say all that because anti-Zionism as it sort of masquerades as a school of thought, as a kind of political philosophy. That's not what it is. It's an evil and it's an ideological movement, as evil as Nazism, as evil as the others that are focused on destroying the state of Israel. One other thought. Anti-Zionism is not the Palestinian villager who is displaced from Nablus. Anti-Zionism is not the Satmar who thinks, we have to wait for Moshiach before we can establish a state. The anti-Zionist is the individual who is dedicated to destroying the state of Israel. And so anti-Zionism isn't a passive position. It's an active kind of operating system. And that's why we think it's so problematic. And the universities, frankly, in the United States are where these ideas are being enshrined, the ideology is being enshrined and encoded into a set of actions. It's being legitimized through kind of pseudo-academia as if it were, again, a valid school of thought. That's why the universities are so problematic, because they're shaping the minds of the next generation. And the individuals who come out of them thinking, for example, that anti-Zionism is a valid way of seeing the world, they might not even understand, but believe me, the Islamic Republic of Iran understands. The Muslim Brotherhood in Qatar understands. Our enemies understand very, very clearly.
Justement, Jonathan Greenblatt, dans les heures qui ont suivi le début de la campagne israélienne en Iran, le 13 juin dernier, l'Anti-Defamation League s'inquiétait et relevait déjà très rapidement la diffusion de messages haineux à l'égard des Juifs, à l'égard de l'État d'Israël et soutenant la dictature iranienne. Vous notiez notamment l'action de l'association Samidoun, proche du groupe terroriste palestinien FPLP. Qu'avez-vous constaté au cours des 12 jours de guerre sur le front de l'antisémitisme tout particulièrement?
It's an excellent question. So certainly if you look at the 12-day war, as President Trump calls it, between Israel and Iran, we were already concerned beforehand because we know that Iran is the single largest state sponsor of terror in the world, and they are the most consequential sort of engine of anti-Semitism in the world. At the ADL, we track extremism and hate, and we see Iranian propaganda pushed through their, their press and propaganda arms. We see it pushed out through Shia mosques. We see it kind of spewed out by the regime on a daily basis. Holocaust distortionism and denialism, anti-Zionism, it's quite ugly. And their leadership is dedicated, again, not toward quote unquote a two-state solution, or even, if you will, achieving dignity for Palestinians. They're focused on destroying Israel. So during the war, we certainly tracked an uptick of Iranian kind of anti-Semitism online. We spent a lot of time at ADL monitoring social media and other platforms, Wikipedia, video games, messaging apps, and across all of it, you see, the work of the Islamic Republic to demonize the state of Israel. I should say, by the way, it's not just Iran. I mean, I think the other source of much of this is Qatar. I think we need to be keeping our eyes on Qatar. Qatar is not just a country that supports, houses Hamas and supports the Muslim Brotherhood. Al Jazeera is like Der Stürmer on a daily basis, pumping anti-Israel and anti-Jewish poison like into the public conversation. So I think they're very problematic as well.
Est-ce que vous estimez que les risques d'actions terroristes décidées par l'Iran contre des cibles juives dans le monde depuis cette guerre du mois de juin en Iran sont désormais particulièrement élevés?
I believe the risk of terrorist actions by Iran are extraordinarily high. The Islamic Republic of Iran, it's a failed government in so many ways. They have failed at bringing economic prosperity to their country. They have failed at bringing political stability to their country. They have failed in terms of improving the social standing of people in their country. But what they have succeeded at, their number one export is terror. And so we have seen over the last 46 years in places like Beirut and in Lebanon and in Syria and in Argentina and in Bulgaria, a willingness to use, if not their own people, their proxies, who operate as their own people, as their agents, to target foreigners, particularly Americans, Israelis, and Jews. They have blood on their hands, from Khomeini to Khamenei. Their hands drip with the blood of Jews from Buenos Aires, from Bulgaria, and there are so many plots that have been foiled that we know about, like in Azerbaijan, like here in France, like in Thailand, like in India, like in the United States. Just this week, an Iranian agent was arrested in Germany for surveilling Jewish sites. This has happened in the United States on multiple occasions as well. They tried to kill the president. They tried to kill the Saudi and Israeli ambassadors in Washington, D.C., not but a decade ago. Of course, we know how they destabilize their own region as well through the proxies and how they target Jewish interests there. So look, I think the Islamic Republic of Iran is a dangerous, deeply problematic government. And the fact of the matter is, there was a lot of debate in the United States and in Europe over the last decade about the JCPOA, the nuclear deal. The only reason it mattered was because of the extremism and the militancy of the Islamic Republic. Japan is a breakout power too. But nobody says we have to stop their program because they don't have a fanatic extremist government in place in Tokyo like they do in Tehran. So yeah, I think the Islamic Republic is a deep danger to Parisian Jews, to French Jews, to European Jews, and to Jews everywhere.
Sur le plan militaire, justement, le Pentagone estimait mercredi que les frappes américaines et israéliennes sur les sites nucléaires iraniens avaient retardé le programme atomique de Téhéran d'1 à 2 années. Est-ce que vous saluez la décision de Donald Trump d'intervenir militairement aux côtés d'Israël contre ce péril nucléaire iranien?
So, there are a couple things to kind of unpack in the question. So let me say, number one, the ADL is a nonpartisan organization in the United States. We don't get involved in politics. We work with presidents and members of Congress and governors and mayors from both political parties. Number two, with President Trump, there are many things he's done over the years that we don't agree with, and we've called that out. But we also are intellectually honest and have a kind of moral coherence. So we may criticize things we don't like, and we will, elevate the things that we admire. And I think President Trump's decision to support the state of Israel in the action against Iran was tremendous and unambiguously positive. Like what he did in allowing the Israelis to conduct the strikes that they did, and then sort of fainting and then going into Fordo was incredibly consequential. I mean, I think, again, the notion of negotiating with the Iranians, I like that idea in theory, but in practice, negotiations and diplomacy only work if there's a credible threat of force on the other end. Otherwise, there's nothing to negotiate. There's no rationale for the other actor to abide by diplomacy. So what President Trump did was incredibly important. And look, I think you also mentioned that the Pentagon estimates that the program is set back a year or two. Look, I am a very proud American and deeply patriotic. I've served in the U.S. government. I deeply believe and respect our government. But on intelligence with Iran, I think it's fair to say the Israelis have demonstrated a mastery of what's happening on the ground in a way that far exceeds, U.S. capabilities. So I appreciate the Pentagon's assessment, but when I've seen what the Israelis can do, how they can strike people like, what was his name? The head of Hamas?
Sinwar.
No, the political head. Oh, was it Mashal?
Khaled Mashal.
Yeah, Khaled Mashal, how they struck him in his bed, in a guest room, like on the 4th floor of a building in Tehran in the middle of the night. How they could...
Ismail Haniyeh.
Oh, that was Haniyeh, excuse me, it was Haniyeh. How they could take out all of the military leadership, how they understood where all the missile launchers were, and on and on and on. So I think Israeli intelligence capabilities and their command over the environment is unparalleled. So again, I know the Pentagon has assessed a year or two. I really want to know what the Israelis think.
Jonathan Grellat, merci beaucoup d'avoir été notre invité sur Radio J. Yes, it's finished.
I'm deeply disappointed. I've enjoyed this very much. I've never been interviewed before in French. So, I have a lot of family here in France.
Yes.
They listen to Radio J. They're all going to be very impressed when they hear it. And I think my words will be translated into French, correct?
Yes.
So they're all going to be incredibly impressed by my fluency in French. So I'm very excited about that.
Merci encore d'avoir été notre invité. Je rappelle que vous êtes le président directeur général, le CEO de l'ADL, l'Anti-Defamation League, l'une des plus grandes associations internationales, organisations internationales consacrées à la lutte contre l'antisémitisme aux États-Unis et dans le monde. À très bientôt sur Radio J. Merci à vous.
Thank you so much.